Hello, everybody. Welcome. Ah, there's the sound of a machine. Just what I was hoping for. Mm. And there's some bird sound. Effectively the opposite of the machine sound. And some human laughter, which is always a good place to start. There's a couple guys in a rowboat, and one of them was looking at his phone instead of nature. The living mirror, the dead mirror instead of the living mirror. Hi. So in recent talks I've been discussing the dandelion model, the toy.
I grew up by Stonestown, so if I take the M1.
And there's at least 3 versions, but the one that I usually play with when speaking in these recordings places unity at the center of a sphere, singularity, transcendental communion. And in the same way that each of the layers are produced by the previous layers and informed by the layers beyond them. Actually, my awareness just destructured while I was structuring it. So ordinarily I talk about it from one of the perspectives where singularity is the inner core, right? And you're not going to find anything that isn't like this. This is why the toy is particularly profound. It gives you a way of seeing into and understanding phenomena that is largely denied to humans, primarily because of damage in our cognition, particularly the forms of cognition that involve representations, tokens, and so forth, words, concepts. But the model, you can place unity either at the inner core, which I think is relatively natural, right? If you look at the earth or the sun, or any phenomena, actually, you'll find an expression or an idealization of singularity. For the trees, it's a seed. For the organisms that reproduce sexually, it's the gametes, the reproductive, what we call cells. And it's not that there's only a bipolar principle, but there is a very trenchant two-form. One could imagine this principle in different ways. But I'm not sure which way I want to frame it here. In electromagnetism, it's positive and negative charge, which pervades fairly deeply into physics. Attractive, repulsive, stays home, goes out, right? Local and distributed, yin and yang. Yin, draws in, concentrates, transforms. Yang goes forth, affects, communicates, transmits. And you can change things from either method, right? You can draw things to you. You can go get things. The yin is the gravitic, and the yang, like sunlight, right? It goes forth. So these two principles are real in the sense of being pervasively obvious to anyone who's looking. But you can put the singularity at the inside of the sphere or the outside. And there's different ways of describing the registers, and it's not a sphere. What it actually is very difficult to speak about without complex mathematical metaphors. Various exotic geometries and Riemannian manifolds and things like this, which I have toys of, right? I talk about manifolds and bubbleization and debubblization, by which I mean, so most of representational cognition depends on collapsing manifolds. I'm doing it right now to produce sentences, right? I take the possibility space and I make selections within that of what not to do and what to do, and this produces a tree structure which I collapse down into, well, like a stick figure. And then I make statements in language like this one. But the actual structure isn't super important. We can visualize it as a concentric sphere, sort of a Russian doll affair, where at the core you have, in this grave simplification, you have the transcendental singularity that is both generative of and receptive to all the other registers. And then you have a large sphere outside of that, which is the impossible. These are just words, but they're important. I mean, there's a reason why I've chosen them. There are purposes for which I've chosen them. And then a large sphere outside of that, which is the possible, and a somewhat smaller sphere outside of that, which is the probable, and then a somewhat smaller sphere, which is the likely, and then a much smaller sphere, which is the semi-deterministic, and then you have the physical layer, right? The universe. And in this toy, everything you see is mostly not here. What's happening is that the entirety of the sphere is collapsing to a point, singularity. An impossible number of times per very tiny amount of time. And then expanding back to the appearance of distinction, so it collapses through the registers along historical trees and historical relational trees, branchial structure anyway, and then it expands back. And so what you're seeing is physical reality in this toy, which really is a toy, theoria in the old Greek sense, a way of seeing. The physical layer is deceptively continuous, but it's actually absent 90-something% of the time. most of the time everything's either in unity or it's collapsing into unity or expanding back from unity out into distinction, like a heartbeat that speeds up dramatically, exponentially every time the heart beats. And that's why you see the structures that you see in nature, right? You've probably seen these images that show, like a river, and then like the human circulatory system, and then a chunk of brain tissue, neuronal branchial space, and so forth. Yeah. And people are like, wow, look, look at the similarity, right? The veins in the biology of a leaf, right? It's just there's all this similarity, yeah. And actually, there's no non-similarity. The dandelion only produces forms that resemble its natures, characters, purposive orientations, and most deceptively, structure. Why do I say deceptively? Well, because this is the problem in cognition. Structure. We have investment bias. If I thought something previously, and I thought it for a long time, and I enacted my human behavior according to this principle that I, quote, believed, unquote, or was my, quote, opinion, unquote, and then I find out that, 40 years later that I had it wrong, I'm not likely to give up that 40 years of investment. Well, I am, actually, but there's a natural inclination to cling to established structure. That structure has like a gravity, which is actually the cause, in a sense. There are no causes. Everything's uncaused. Well, it's very complex what this means, but it doesn't just mean nothing. Where am I going here? This is so silly. Okay, so this idea of karma, right? If karma were the fundamental principle, there would be no escaping it at all, ever. But it turns out that there is a door to the prison of karma, and we point at this door with this word enlightenment, which is kind of hilarious. It recalls cartoons where a light bulb turns on above someone's head. But before we had light bulbs, there would be like a star in that little thought bubble, which is much more appropriate, actually, than a light bulb. Light in the mind, which is very literally what happened to me when I met Toymaker. Suddenly, unlike all of my previous experience of being a human, there was a light in my mind. And the light began to teach me impossible, non-human things. Now, was that Darren's enlightenment? Well, depends on, why you're asking, what your purposes are, and so forth.
And they remember you.
Generally, being a student of Zen, I don't think that's how enlightenment is supposed to happen. But, supposed to, and all these ideas, well, good luck with them. So, today, I've been listening to a podcast, and typically I cannot remember any of the people involved. It may be an Essentia Foundation podcast. It's with a man who's studied non-ordinary cognition, which is sometimes called psi phenomena, for the past 50 years, scientifically. Right? So they actually do tests, experiments. They run experiments. And I think I'm going to be able to remember where I'm going, my thread memory here. So I want to talk first about something kind of trippy. Which is science, right? Science in our time, there are a variety of foundational presumptions that are rarely articulated but are ever present in the literature and the methods. And one of these is that the scientist is somehow separate from the phenomena they're studying, right? And has some kind of a privileged position in time-space from which they can objectively inquire into that which is factual. Get the facts. Now, it should be obvious that as useful and profound as science can be, it's also lethally dangerous for humans and many other organisms, all the organisms, because science is the primary source of the technologies with which we assault everything that could ever exist. Omnicidal, human insanity. In any case, there's this idea that the privileged, scientist in the laboratory, having excluded 99.7% of all that exists, is now in a privileged position to inquire into the facts from outside the space, right? It would be like, I guess the metaphor here is God, right? The omniscient, omnipotent inquirer. So the scientists poke at things and dissect them and poke at the parts and stuff, and then they, suggest proclamations, and derivations, and so forth. And there's some reliability to that. Like, we shouldn't ignore the findings. On the other hand, the principles on which this is founded are bullshit. There's no separate scientist from phenomena. There's no such thing. It's impossible. You can, oh wow. So I'm just meandering around, but I've come across something I very rarely seen, which is a dead turtle. It's still processing it. See, I still use a mechanical metaphor. I'm processing it. It was very shocking because everything around me seems alive, right? And then, boom, there's the dead turtle, rotting, attended by many flies. So yeah, this idea of objectivity, it's we need a better word, right? That makes clear the suppositions underlying the perspective that grants us, some graspable purchase on the mechanics operant at the physical layer. So one of the things that occurred to me was we should have scientists we should have two wings on the bird of science, right? We should have the wing that's semi-objectivist, right? We don't ever try to influence the results, and then we should also have this other wing, which is that we try to influence the results. And this is the wing that parapsychology utilizes. Right? They get a randomized. They try to make it really, really random, and then they see, like, can the human affect the system, or can they predict the system at greater than chance and p-values, above 0.05 and so forth. But I think that's a very strange thing to do because obviously, especially if you're doing an experiment, how would you, like the participants in the experiment are entangled with the experimental context, not just merely by the quantum physics idea of entanglement, which I want to separate from the other kinds. I want to treat that one very specially, and I think we should, because that has a very specific meaning in physics, and we shouldn't just transmit that meaning to all other shit. Nonetheless, there is something that resembles entanglement, and actually qualifies to some degree as entanglement. Just the interest and focus of the researchers on a specific phenomena changes both the researchers and the phenomena. So we should have both wings on this bird, right? We should have science that's trying to find out, do humans affect phenomena? Because if we're presuming that the presence of the humans has no effect on the phenomena and no effect on the humans, that's insane. That's just wrong. There's no chance of that being true. Findings affect researchers. Running experiments changes what researchers are. That's a specific mode of human cognition, awareness, purposive behavior, so forth. So the manifold's already collapsing toward this, point-like instrument. And we should, happily and joyfully be aware of that, I think. So, in previous discussions of the dandelion toy, I think I have largely avoided discussing this word consciousness. And it's a catch-all term, right? Awareness, thinking, so forth. But your mind is just like the dandelion toy, and if you wanted to know what enlightenment is, it's simply localizing awareness to the singularity. In this sense, all phenomena are not you personally, but you are one with all phenomena. You have the same origin. You transit the layers, the registers of the dandelion. Most of the time you're not here. The personal you is like the physical layer. It's very compelling, but it doesn't exist. Now, to say it doesn't exist is a bit of a stretch, but what I mean is that the compelling continuity and reliability of it is the result of an illusion that resembles persistence of vision. If I just flash a light fast enough, it looks like the light is always on and there's no darkness, and what is producing the light may disappear. So your mind is like the dandelion, and you'll notice that this is very obvious if I ask you, for example, is it your experience that you are one with all beings? Your answers may vary, but if I ask you, in the next 5 minutes, I want you to rise up off the earth and consume the moon with your mouth. Right? You will immediately, unless you think I'm playing a game, in which case we can play, but you will immediately correlate that request with the impossibility layer in the dandelion, and you will say that is impossible. Now, you can falsely correlate impossibility. If I ask you, without jumping or moving, rise up off the ground, you may think that's impossible. Right? You can make that correlation, but it's not. Humans have done this. Other organisms do this. It's just that it's common to think of it as impossible. Right? And if I ask you to go to the store and grab me a can of corn, then you will know that's possible, and you can translate that into the probable, right? You get the credit card or some cash, and you traverse the intervals situationally, relationally, and so forth, and you go to the store. You see many, many cans of different kinds of cans of corn. My goodness, how many kinds of corn are there? How many kinds of cans of corn? So, and you could, then come home and hand me the corn and say, here is the corn you requested. And that's a bit like the physical layer, right? But you can see that it always traverses all the layers, and your mind has all these layers. And there are subliminal aspects to your mind, which isn't actually yours at all. It's a participatory, you're like a location in a field, right? A point of origin, as well as a destination. So your mind, it has these same kinds of layers, right? And you'll find that there isn't anything that doesn't have something like this, which is why it's such a great toy. It's not a theory of everything because it's not a theory. Right? It's a toy. It's a perspectival trope or analogy, right? A simile, a metaphor. Both. So your mind has these layers, and the one at the surface, which you call your thinking, that's like the physical layer. It's structured by historical transformations, relationships, developments, undevelopments, and so forth. Failures of development and all kinds of things. And it's a lot like a tree, but it's like, instead of being like the whole tree, which would be amazing, because then you'd have the earth and the sun and time, space, and all of that. It's like the tips of the branches in certain areas of the tree. And this thinking thing, you trust it. Right? And again, as I said before, it's very useful in a limited scope. The problem is that we don't keep it in that scope. It escapes that scope and pervades over all kinds of things which it shouldn't have anything to do with. In other words, things for which it is neither adapted nor effective. And there's lots of explanations, and some of them are really weird. So, for example, in a sort of a psychoanalytic theory that has some gems in it, but is also bullshit. And the fact that it's bullshit doesn't mean it can't be effective, right? This is the thing. We think, well, no, only things that are true are effective. No, that's not true at all. Like, that thing itself is untrue. Effectiveness in humans is an extremely complex situation. This is why, someone could and has, regularly this happens. Someone goes to a medicine person and they are cured of a disease that the allopaths, couldn't even affect. That's not the only thing that happens, and there is bullshit. But it's a topology, and the mountaintops are real, right? And the valleys are also real. The bullshit, there's a lot of bullshit. Right? The jewels at the top of the mountains actually exist. So, almost all the spiritual traditions are aware that the sort of encrusted, sclerotic surface layer of consciousness is like a junkyard to which we are incredibly, compellingly attached. And so they, hopefully gently and effectively ask us to retract, rescind that attachment. And if one gets even a simple experience of this, it's very clear that most of what occupies our minds most of the time, especially in the form of thinking, fear, predictions, accounting, courtroom-like dramas, memories of trauma, and so forth, not to dismiss them. They're part of our experience, so to speak, but they're not real. If we put an asterisk in front of this word, that means like more real each time you approach it. Unfortunately, holding structures in consciousness makes them seem very real, and this is why people will declare with absolute, well, I'll kill you, if you don't believe me. With absolute, bizarre, ultra collapsing of consciousness, awareness, purposive orientation, perspective, value, ethics, and so forth, you can get very collapsed states in humans, and even in myself. So your mind is very much like this dandelion toy. There's a unity at the core that transcends any of the phenomena in the other registers. And there's an impossibility engine that under certain circumstances kicks in, and the man lifts, a 6-ton car off of his child or something, right? Or, the athletic performer does what we all knew was impossible. One of the aspects of human nature is to import impossibility across those layers and express it here in the physical where it's least likely. There's a layer where there's nothing else. It's all just impossible stuff. Amazing, impossible. And the layer inside that, a communion singularity layer, is explosively transcendental. It's a billion times more transcendental every time you encounter it. Right? It's not a resting, finished state. And the seeming finished states. Hi. Of physical reality are deceptive, primarily because they're still there every time you look. I put the fork on the counter every time I look. It's still there. It's concretely, factually, yes, in a very limited array of concerns, the fork is there on the counter. And if I close my eyes, it's still there. I can reach out and feel it. I probably can't smell it, though I might be able to. And if it's just sitting there, I probably can't hear the resonance of the, molecular and atomic and quantum physical situations that the fork is an expression of. Now there is one feature that I want to speak about briefly, which I haven't touched on previously, which is this. Human concepts of phenomena, or names and tokens and ideas and so forth, those are not the same thing as the phenomena. That's a layer. That's the representational cognition layer, or the cognitive layer, that floats on the physical layer of the dandelion. And it's really important to understand something very profound, which is this. What if there were no humans? Like, what if suddenly we could just flip the switch and the humans are gone? We can turn it back on, they'll come back. Right? But in our toy-like thinking, if we could just flip the switch and the humans are gone, then are all the phenomena that we're familiar with still there? Right? This is the dumb. There's actually a better answer to that paradox than simpler one than this one. Right? It's if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? So first of all, tree, sound, and forest, those are human concepts. So if there's no human there, none of those concepts they don't exist. They're just gone. Right? So if we were to if we flip the switch and the humans go away, it's really important to understand this. This is a fundamental principle of clarity of thought. If we flip the switch and we turn off the humans and they just disappear for a moment, then all human concepts disappear with them. So then we could ask ourselves kind of dumb questions like, well, what's going on? So, here I am localized in time space as Darren. Poof, I disappear. Are the phenomena still there? Well, and this is, the problem of observation and measurement, wave collapse in quantum physics and so forth. It depends on why we're asking what we will find. However, all the human ideas and words and methods of knowledge are gone. And there are no humans there to comment on or not comment on whatever is going on or not going on without us. Now, right now, there is no universe in which there are zero humans. This is also very important to understand. Humans have these questions about, could there be life on other planets? So first of all, yes, there's life on other planets. But fundamentally, even if there were not, the universe is alive because there's life on this one. Right? Just like the ocean is alive if it has life on an island, or in the shores around that island. The ocean becomes alive. You can't have one-way transmission of qualities. Right? Earth is alive, but the rest of time-space is dead. It's impossible. If Earth is alive, the universe is alive because it contains the Earth. The natural inheritance of category properties and so forth. Right? But as far as phenomena go, with no one there to comment on them, the question dissolves. There's no one to hold the question. And so, does the sun still exist if you take away the humans? Well, something might be going on, but all of the human ideas about the sun and all of that, human experiences of the sun, theories and science and arguments, religion and so forth, all of that goes away. At least locally here. It doesn't actually go away in the dandelion. So your mind is like this dandelion thing. And one of the things that happens when you fall asleep and the thinking stuff stops, right, is that worlds emerge. Your mind becomes worlds. And, these worlds might seem rather limited in their scope, but they're infinitely unlimited in their relational depth. Yeah? So the precedence flips over, right? From things doing functions to relationships. in vignettes. Yeah, little vignettes that the mind invents in you. Inwardly vents.
Like I will. 3 days is like the perfect amount. Yeah, it's like is enough. You can. What?
It's amazing. In my house, it's very rare for there to be women. And so in the house, it's almost never the... That's a very powerful signal from the male goose. There's almost never the vocal music that's natural to women, and some women just walk by me and their voices were so animated, beautifully and vitally alive in those high registers. And it's like sunlight or something, right? Without that, it's just kind of dark. So these were some of my thoughts for today. I think this is enough for now. I'm grateful for this time together. I wish you bliss and wonder, joy and liberation, the fulfillment of the promise of your human incarnation. Take a moment, tickle the algorithm if you will. Support me by leaving a comment or a like or share, or actually directly support my work if you want to. I'm grateful for all of you who pay attention and enjoy my recordings. When I'm making them, I am with you. Yeah? When you're listening to them, we are together. It is good. Iksokapi, Blackfoot. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Peace for now.